Let's go over the Chapter 17 homework problems. So the first question is dealing with the activity levels. And so you're going to classify each activity as either unit level, batch level, product level, or facility level. So you can check this out on page 138 and 139 of Chapter 17. You can also go to my lecture video on Blackboard. So Chapter 17, Part 3, the beginning of that video, I go over the activity levels. So you're going to go ahead and choose if it's batch, facility, product, or unit for each one. Next problem, problem 2. So requirement 1, you're going to do the plant-wide rate. So that's that single rate that we had been using. And so you can refer to page 130. And so you'll put in the formula. And then you'll drop in the numbers. And so to get our total overhead, right, for the single plant-wide rate, we're going to have to combine the two departments' overhead to get the total overhead for the plant. And then you're told the total direct labor hours. So you'll get the overhead rate per direct labor hour in requirement 1. And then requirement 2, you're going to use that plant-wide rate to allocate the overhead. So again, we can see that on page 130 in the textbook. So you'll use the plant-wide rate that you calculate in requirement 1, and that's going to be per direct labor hour. And then you'll multiply it by the hours used to make a desk lamp. Since we're calculating the overhead cost per unit, it's going to be the hours used to make one desk lamp, which is given to you up here. Okay, and so again, we want the total direct labor hours, so we need to take the direct labor hours and combine them, right, from the two departments to get the total direct labor hours for the plant. Requirement 3 is we're going to do departmental rates. And so page 132 in the chapter goes over departmental rates. And so you'll calculate a departmental rate for each department. So the fabricating department, we're going to take the fabricating overhead, and it says that our activity base is going to be machine hours. So we'll use the fabricating department's machine hours to get the overhead rate per machine hour in the fabricating department. Then we'll take the assembly department's overhead, okay, and we'll divide that by the activity base for assembly, which they tell you is direct labor hours. So we'll divide that by the assembly's direct labor hours. And so then for assembly, we'll have a rate per direct labor hour. And then you're going to use those rates from requirement 3. You're going to take those overhead rates and multiply it by the desk lamp hours per unit. So for fabricating, we'll take the machine hours per unit. For assembly, we're going to take the direct labor hours per unit. And then we'll get the overhead cost per one desk lamp. Problem 3, again, we're going to calculate the single plant-wide rate, and you're told 13,000 direct labor hours. So again, refer to page 130 in the textbook. And then we'll use this plant-wide rate, the rate per direct labor hour, and we'll allocate to jobs 31 and 42. Okay, and so you'll be able to use the direct labor hours. You're given that for each of the jobs. Requirement 3, we're going to do ABC. So we need to calculate activity rates for each of the 4 activities. And so you have the budgeted cost. Okay. Oh, and here's the total cost that we would have needed in requirement 1, right? We would use the total. But then when we get to requirement 3, we're going to use the cost for each activity. Okay. And then we'll divide it by the activity base. And so for every activity, we're going to have a different activity base. Okay. And so for assembly, we're going to get the rate per direct labor hour, product design, the rate per engineering hour, machine or electricity, the rate per machine hour, and then setup, the rate per setup. And then you'll use those rates. Here's the activity rates. And you're going to apply overhead to jobs 31 and 32. So you'll use the activity base for the job, the activity usage for the job, and multiply it by the activity rate to get the total allocated cost. Okay. And then our last problem is going to be our Excel problem. So we're going to have to use cell references, right? We can't type in any numbers. I think we've got the hang of this here. Okay. So requirement 1, we're going to do the activity rate. So we can take the cost. We can use cell reference for the cost. And then the budgeted activity usage, we'll be using the totals to get the activity rate. And then we'll use those activity rates and multiply it by the activity usage. So first we'll do rounded edge. So here will be the activity usage for rounded edge, and then here will be square edge. And so we'll divide by the units produced to get the overhead cost per unit. So we'll get the units produced is up here for rounded edge and square edge. Okay. And then we're going to calculate the cost per unit. So the overhead cost per unit we've calculated here. We'll need to get the direct material cost per unit and the direct labor cost per unit for rounded edge and squared edge. And so you'll get that up above. So we've got the total direct materials, and then you'll have to divide by the units produced. The total direct labor divided by units produced. And you'll do the same thing for squared edge. And then we've got one more thing in Chapter 17. We've got our first Tableau activity. So we've got Tableau Mini Case 1. Now this is worth 20 points, so we want to make sure we do a good job on this one. And so in these Tableau cases, we're going to be using data visualizations. So here we've got the overhead cost by department. We can see a graph showing it, 8 million. And then here we can see the breakdown. Finishing, when you come and you hover over it, is 3 million. Assembly is 5 million. And we can see the direct labor hours and the budget hours shown as a graph. So we can see we've got total direct labor hours of 125, assemblies 100, finishings 25. Machine hours in total is 100, assembly 70, machines 30. So here we can kind of break this down. Here's the supervision direct labor hours. Here's the maintenance machine hours, right? So this is where you're grabbing all the information instead of it being presented to you in words. We're going to use these data visualizations, okay? So you're going to go ahead and you are going to calculate the activity rate for maintenance and supervision. So we've got the budgeted activity usage. Maintenance was 100 machine hours, right? And so we can see that up here. 100 machine hours, supervision's 125,000 direct labor hours. So we'll take the budgeted costs for maintenance and supervision. We can get that breakdown up here. And that's how we'll get our activity rates. And then part 2 in 2A, okay, we are going to use those activity rates to allocate costs to 2 products. So we have XL and RD. Okay. So we've got these activity rates that we've calculated from the previous part, and then the machine hours for XL. Okay. So we're told there's 25,000 units, and then we can multiply that by the number of machine hours per unit to get the total machine hours for the XL. And then for supervision, we want the direct labor hours. And so we can see XL's direct labor hours per unit and then multiply that by the 25,000 units. Because we're going to get the allocated costs in total and then divide by the units produced to get the overhead cost per unit. Okay, so we'll have to do that, and then same for RD. There's 25,000 units of RD, but to get the machine hours, we're going to have to multiply the 25,000 by the machine hours per unit. Okay. Requirement 2B, then, we're going to be calculating the plant-wide rate. And so we want to get the overhead cost per unit. Okay. And so the activity usage, you're told the direct labor hours per unit. Okay. And then you're going to have to calculate the overhead rate using a single plant-wide rate and direct labor hours. Okay, so we'll have to come up here and we can see our total direct labor hours are 125,000. We can see our total overhead is 8 million. So we'll use that, divide that to get our plant-wide rate. Okay, and then multiply that by the direct labor hours per unit for XL and the direct labor hours for RD, right, times the same plant-wide rate. And then requirement 3 says, which method would the XL production manager prefer? Well, obviously, so it's going to be either would they prefer to use the ABC or would they prefer the plant-wide rate? Well, obviously, they would prefer whichever method is going to assign the smaller amount of overhead. Okay, so you'll see one of them, plant-wide rate gives them a smaller amount, and then the other product, ABC, gives them the smaller amount. Okay, so it's the same thing as what you did from the homework, but you're grabbing the amounts from these data visualizations. And so use your check my work sparingly. I would do the whole problem before I checked my work. So good luck.